Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 23rd of October 2024. Forgot what country I was in and what date it was. We are looking at obviously the map of Ukraine here, the mapping synthesis between Andrew Perpetua's map and Zherebets maps, the pro-Russian mappers map. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on this screen at the moment. Right, quite a lot of change, a lot of Russian improvements right across the front lines, including up in Kursk for a large area there. Kursk is an interesting one. There seems to be a bit of everything going on there. We have, unfortunately, I still have the issue with labels going off on one. I'm going to play around with whether I can just get rid of the label, or I might have to change it to R. But basically, there's a bit of an issue that goes on between Google Earth, which is this program, and Google Maps, where the maps are made. And there's no labels selected, but it then just decides to put them on themselves, and then it messes up everything, makes it look horrible. Anyway, nonetheless, we can see that in the Klishchiivka area here, as the Russians were being pushed back north of the Ukraine-Russia border there, back towards the same river that comes broadly along here, and doglegs up there. So we have the Klishchiivka, we have Klishchiivka there. The Russians had been pushed right back. Now they've attacked the Ukrainians back and have both mappers now agree the Russians have largely pushed the Ukrainians back, not as far as to the border as according to Andrew Perpetua, but certainly a good chunk of this area. Still some grey zone in the Oblast and Vesoloya sort of area, but yeah, the Russians successfully pushing the Ukrainians back there. And then on the main Kursk salient, it seems to have settled down a little bit. The Russians have been pushing regaining large areas of territory in this western side. But actually, the Ukrainians seem to have pushed back, at least according to Zherebets maps, at the Zheleny-Shylak area. This is an area where some of the Ukrainian POWs were executed by Russian soldiers. Indeed, no report says, according to several sources, Ukrainian units have conducted counterattacks near Zheleny-Shylak in the Kursk region and encircled a group of Russian forces that are likely overstretched, or that likely overstretched their attacks. So good news there, pushing the Russians back in that area. As you can see from this, quite a different interpretation of what's going on. No reports has. Here we have Zheleny-Shylak, I'm sure. Yes. And the front line sort of loops around that town and goes sort of directly north. So here we have Zheleny-Shylak, and we can see that no reports has the Ukrainian line just right the way up there. And this red line is, of course, the Russian line. So quite a big difference between all the mappers, and Andrew Perpetua has a Russian line right back here, this being predominantly grey zone. So really big interpretation differences between the mappers, and Zherebets maps very much on the Russian charitable side there. Then we have some pushback at the Russians here on the eastern side of the salient at Cherkasskaya-Konopelka. Been quite a bit of fighting going on there for a good few weeks now. Zherebets maps does do a bit of an analysis on their Twitter handle here. Oh no, not that one. That was the wrong one. If I can go back to where their actual one was, here it is. This is actually supposed to be there. What we have is, I'm sorry about this. So situation in the Kursk front at Koronevsky. So that's Koronovo area, which is to say pretty much where that first counterattack was, over in this direction by Zheleny-Shylak. Koronovo is up here. That's that main settlement there. In that district, the Ukrainian army launched a counterattack over the last 48 hours and managed to recapture some positions south of Zheleny-Shylak. The attacks continue until the localities of Zheleny-Shylak and Novoivanovka, where Russian army has repelled those attacks. At Sudya or Sudyansky district, clashes between the Russian and Ukrainian forces continue in the locality of Cherkasskaya-Konopelka. The situation north of Martianivka was clarified as Ukrainians control more territory previously taken there. Actually, that's not marked on my map as a change. I wonder if that's something new or whether that was marked previously, but that's up Martianivka here along this road north of Sudzha. So it could be that the Russians are actually a little bit further back there than initially thought. Let's try and see if that is... No, I think that was from previously, actually. I have... yeah, so that was marked previously. So they have Russians have been pushed back there as well. Okay, so coming out of Kursk, we can come along now to not quite the Kharkiv sectors that we've previously seen, but actually some attacks just to the west of there, and the Ukrainians here moving across the border and into this settlement of Zherebets. Now, we heard about this the other day. They'd already taken up to those pins, and now further to the northeast, they have taken, or at least pushed the Russians back to the outer outskirts of that settlement. Now, the Russians will no doubt have to pile in reinforcements to here, because this is the Ukrainians moving into Russian territory, and down here we've got Russians moving into Ukrainian territory. So I imagine the Russians are going to pull some of the troops back from here to sort out here, and that might allow the Ukrainians to retake some of the Kharkiv Oblast areas that the Russians have previously taken. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out there. But yeah, interesting move by the Ukrainians. Not really heard too much about Vovchansk and even Lipsy area. We come down to the Kupyansk-Svatove-Kreminna frontline, that northeastern axis, and we can see that there are quite a lot of gains for the Russians in and around, or actually the area between Pischany here, where they've got pretty much the Oskil River, and then down here to towards this other area that they're fighting. Yeah, Vishneve. I couldn't remember Zherelne. So the Russians, having taken quite a lot of fields in that neck of the woods, as you can see there, fairly extensive gains, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a map here for the Russians. Let's have a look. Soledar, Toretsk, Chasiv, Zherebets River. Yeah, so we have some gains there. I think that's where we're talking about. Yes, so that's where they've got to the Oskil River, just up there, and further down here, that's where we've just been talking about there. So yeah, exactly there. Let's see what they say about that Surat maps. The situation in Luhansk front during the last 24 hours, the Russians have made significant advances on the western bank of the Zherebets River, expanding the buffer zone around the localities of Andriivka, Myasozharivka and Stabilisation, and entering the Kharkiv Oblast on a new axis towards Lozova. Okay, so there is you see this white dotted line. It's very faint there. It comes down there. That separates Luhansk Oblast from Donetsk Oblast over here. From Kharkiv Oblast over here. And so this is, getting through through into Kharkiv in a different area, where they have done that, elsewhere in a number of places up here. So this is slightly worrying, but like I said the other day with Greg Terry on the live, this is less of an issue. Losing all of this land up to the Oskil River, they've kind of breached the Zherebets River up here, particularly in the north. I wouldn't be too worried about this land as a whole. I think it's a lot more problematic when you come down to these much more, a lot more industrial urban areas down here, rather than these kind of undulating farmlands of the Kharkiv and Luhansk Oblasts just up here. Nevertheless, losing land makes it difficult for the Ukrainians, because they have to get that back somehow. Either it becomes part of the bargaining chip, or they have to take it back militarily. So, work has to be done to retake this land one way or another. So that's definitely, I don't know what they're doing over there, definitely an issue. Okay, in this part of and sorry about all the labels there, in this part of the front, just north of the Zherebets forest, north of the Terni-Torska region, the Russians really have taken quite a lot of land. Andrew Perpetua with these lighter pink pins. That shows you where the previous Andrew Perpetua lines were, and the blue line there is where it is now. Right, so we are seeing quite a lot of land taken there. That's really significant. A good deal of that is, well, actually all of that is really catching up with what Surat Maps had previously said. This is a little bit of an added area for Surat Maps and Andrew Perpetua, which is this area going towards or taking Novosadove and getting towards Vuhledar-Marinka there. Really challenging for the Ukrainians. Nevska was taken previously, stuck a flag up there, and that told us that they pretty much had control over that at that time. You've got these lakes by Terni, Yampolivka, going down to Torska, so it could be that we are going to finally get fighting in Terni after it was supposedly happening months and months ago, and it didn't quite pan out. But the Russians are definitely making significant strides forward along this northeastern front line. Okay, so we come down to the Sversk area. No changes there from either of the mappers, but we do have some changes in Chasiv, and this is very worrying. If true, this is Surat Maps making some pretty bold claims concerning Chasiv. That's a lot of land taken there. So they say the situation in the Chasiv front, the Russian army broke the first defences in Chasiv. During 1 week, the Russian forces have achieved important advances in the city after taking the first hills west of Kalinivka. The locality came under full Russian control, and it was possible to advance through the forest, capturing the Druzhba children's camp and later the system of trenches adjacent to the Pivnichny pond. At the same time, during the last 6 days, Russian troops have managed to take control of the Novi district and almost all of the Zhotnevyi district. Okay, so all things considered, this is pretty challenging. Andrew Perpetua has some minor gains for the Russians around here. That is still to the east of the canal as it comes down. But for Surat Maps, a huge swathes of Chasiv are now under Russian control, including this sort of main area just the other side of the canal from the canal micro district, which is here. If you remember, they're fighting over that. They've been stalled at this canal for a long time, but it could be that now they've finally broken through and they're having success right up and down that Chasiv front. So the Ukrainians have done an incredible job to keep the Russians at bay there. But if Surat Maps is to be trusted in these claims, that is definitely a real challenge for the Ukrainians going forward. So we come down now to Toretsk-New York sort of area, and actually some blue pins there. Russians being pushed back, according to Andrew Perpetua, in the middle of Toretsk. Bit of joy for them there, and some slight gains for the Russians. Tiny bit, really, just that area there. That's according to Surat Maps, in pretty much that same kind of area. So slightly contradictory claims there, but there does seem to be somewhat something of a stabilisation in the New York Toretsk area. There is a little bit to say about that. So Ukraine has stabilised the situation in Toretsk, says the Kyiv Independent, but Russia is concentrating troops in the town's east. Says the military, the situation in Toretsk is relatively stabilised. We are now holding the line unchanged, said the spokesperson of the Operational Tactical Group Luhansk. So I guess that's good news there. We then come on down to Soledar, what we will do in a minute. But that's the next source. For the time being, some gains according to Surat Maps in that northern area of their of this long, thin bridgehead into pass through New York into the north to Leonidivka there. The other mappers don't really have that. No Reports doesn't have that. Andrew Perpetua doesn't have that. But Surat Maps claiming there's further gains there. So it's going to be interesting to see what explains the difference between the two. I would assume there is some kind of activity all the way up here. Whether the Russians control it or whether it's grey zone, I guess is open to debate. And then further gains in and around this area. Andrew Perpetua accepting that the Russians have pushed certainly somewhat further forward in this neck of the woods. So, yeah, some joy there for the Russians in New York. They're really kind of pushing the Ukrainians everywhere they possibly can. So we come to the Kursk sector as a whole. No change to the north, which has been fairly stable for an awful long time. No change to the northwest, and then some few changes here and there on the western side of the sector, and it's really about Soledar. So Soledar is this settlement here, this town on that western part of the sector, and the Russians pushing on the east, and then according to Surat maps, not just the east but the north and the south as well, and really looking to operationally encircle that. There are these roads out to the west. Perhaps this one has been interdicted, so it's not like fully encircled, but according to Surat maps, they are getting there. Let's listen to, we'll see a few things on Soledar. So this is just south of Soledar, around here, Sversk-Lyman, where the Russians stuck a North Korean flag somewhere around here, probably on one of these sort of heaps, I think it was. Could have been any number of places. Anyway, the Russians taking quite a number of fields in that area. No Reports says Russians planted their flag close to the central part of Soledar, south of the Solona River. So they've put a flag, stuck a flag in and around here. That's probably why Surat maps has done this. Stick a flag there, Surat maps will put that fully under Russian control. Doesn't necessarily mean that. It just takes a single human to break through the lines, whack a flag down, and there is that. But it also could be that they do control that area. So they planted their flag there, although it's still marked as a grey zone. The area south of this location is highly likely Russian controlled. This follows ongoing Russian attacks, mainly coming from the south and east. So he's got that as a grey zone. Andrew Perpetua as a grey zone, although No Reports does say it's highly likely controlled to the south by Russia. So that's what Surat maps has. That's looking challenging there. Soledar is going to be in quite a bit of trouble as it is further and further encircled. And as we come further to the south there, more gains. It's all about Kharkiv from the north and from the south as well. They're all pushing to equalise this line all the way. I mean, what you're really looking... Oh, I wish those labels weren't there. I'm going to have to do something about that. But what you're looking at have happen is... what the Russians are wanting, certainly, is this line to equalise all the way down there, and that will cause the Ukrainians quite a bit of consternation. There's some important logistical areas, but then there are important logistical areas for that area. So you lose that area, they become less important, right? So I mean, it's a bit of a truism. But anyway, Kharkiv, you've got some of these gains for the Russians further to the north, as there's this pocket that's surrounding Kharkiivka, and that's what Greg Terry is talking about. He said that's going to be in the news quite a bit next few days because the Russians it's well defended around there, he said, but they are pushing, and as you can see, both mappers having considerable gains for the Russians in that general area. Okay, so some of the sources here we have. That's No Report. Sorry, Matt. We have No Report saying near Kharkiivka and Kharkiv, Russians have advanced into Hrynik and took control over the adjacent hamlet of Izmailivka. According to geolocated footage, the fight will now focus on Kharkiivka, with fights already happening in the northern parts of the settlement. So this is not looking good. You've got the settlement of Hrynik. That was just mentioned, and yeah, No Reports are saying fighting is now in the north of Kharkiivka. I don't know, does he say that Hrynik was actually taken there? Russians advanced into that there and took control over the adjacent hamlet, which is here, Izmailivka. So they're in control of that. That's what Surat Maps has got, in control of that, and they have advanced into Hrynik. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. It's not looking particularly rosy for the Ukrainians. The Russians really are putting a lot of pressure right across the front lines and getting closer as well to Kharkiv, which is also a worry. What has to be said, though, is that the Russians are losing, I think, quite a bit of equipment in the area, which is fairly typical. Paratroopers of the 46th Airmobile Brigade again showed endurance against Russian forces in the Kharkiv sector. Over the past day, they repelled 10 attacks, including using various types of equipment. Russians tried to attack with 11 pieces of equipment. 2 tanks were destroyed and 1 was damaged. That footage is there. I mean, you can see lots of footage of Russians losing a lot of equipment, but they do that and still take their land, of course. And that is really challenging for the Ukrainians. They are just being relentlessly battered by equipment and personnel. And you think, surely you can't throw more at this, and then they do. And that was, I was thinking that a year ago, and here we are a year later, and they're still throwing more and more equipment and personnel at these problems. Here, further to the south, between Vuhledar and Marinka there, the Russians are just increasing their territorial control, expanding through these fields. I don't know if there are main trench lines that will be further back here, maybe somewhere along here. I'd have to look at some sources to see what the trench lines are like around there. We've got the Russian trench lines mapped out, but of course, really, it's probably more relevant to get Ukrainian trench lines. But I don't know if they are as mapped on open source intelligence sources, because it's a bit of an OPSEC thing. Like, you'd much rather map the Russians than the Ukrainians. But yeah, so the Russians pushing through Sversk-Lyman and taking full control over Konstantinivka, as according to Andrew Perpetua, and then moving on now into Antonivka, as they just marching on towards the west. A number of places along here now to the north of Vuhledar. Vuhledar appears to be something of a distant memory now, as the Russians are increasing their control of all the land to the north of there. This is all, it is challenging for the Ukrainians. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And then just some small gains here, a little triangle of land in the Velika Novosilka sector that they have pushed on in as well. So definitely challenging for the Ukrainians pretty much everywhere. The Ukrainians still holding on in Kharkiv, and they have had some success to the north of in Kursk. They've had some success to the north of the Kharkiv border here. I think the only places Ukraine can guarantee themselves is a little bit of easier success is going north of the border, where the Russians will be less prepared, less fortified. There are fortifications, as you can see. These yellow lines denote fortifications, trench lines. There will be fortifications, but they won't be as established as what you see right down in the occupied Ukrainian territories. So there's no surprise that the Ukrainians are going to be pushing here. I mean, it won't be with huge numbers of troops and resources, but it'll be easier for them to take ground here than it will be to take ground anywhere else, or even to withstand the Russians in some of these areas. So that's the calculation I think they're making, similar to Kursk, which is if we're going to have to swap territory, then this is probably going to be worth 2-1 in terms of Ukrainian territory. So if we can take some Russian territory, it will be a useful bargaining chip, maybe. We'll see. Anyway, that's enough from me. Let me know what you think. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.